Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 15 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
Hey, Mike, I'm doing good tonight.
I'm glad to hear it.
Just got done recording a pretty intense True Crime All the Time.
Yeah, Israel Keys, man. That guy was, he's something else.
Yeah, he's kind of diabolical, man.
Yeah, I think for a serial killer, and you and I have covered a number of them, he is one of the most methodical, diabolical. I mean, you could throw a bunch of adjectives in there.
Right.
Just the lengths that he went to and how much he enjoyed killing. I mean, those are the two things that really jumped out at me. This is not us. I mean, this is in his own words. He enjoyed it.
Yeah.
He had to have it. You know, to fly one place and drive 1,000 miles and cover your tracks and hide weapons. I mean, you have to hear the details.
Yeah, it's definitely a good one to check out for sure.
It's something else.
So after you listen to this, flip over there and check that one out.
Yeah, definitely. If you're a TCAT Unsolved listener, but you've never checked out True Crime All the Time, you know, definitely give it a listen. You know, I think our last two episodes, have been two of our best.
They really have.
When you think about, I think this Israel Keys is a good episode. Our last episode on the Wichita Massacre was, a lot of positive feedback on that. And really, you know, the Jennings 8, the episode that we put out last week for Unsolved, we have gotten so much positive feedback on it. And, you know, it's really appreciated. It makes us feel good.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
It makes us feel like we're heading down the right path. We're doing the right things.
Yeah. And that's it. You know, the unsolved by far is harder to research than True Crime All the Time.
Yeah. There's no doubt about it.
Right.
Because with True Crime All the Time, there's so much more. I mean, you got to boil it down.
Yes.
Almost, right? You got to boil it down to what's the most important to the listener, what makes the most sense, the flow, all of that. With some of the Unsolved, and we're probably going to find that tonight or on today's episode of the Honolulu Strangler, because that's what we're covering. You know, there's information out there, but you really got to work to find it because it's few and far between.
The older the case, the harder it is to get the information to go deep enough to even to get enough rabbit holes to chase too, right?
Well, yeah, and it depends, right? We do some unsolved cases where you've got a lot of victims, but you have a lot of suspects. And when you have both of those, you have a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
But when you have one of the, just one or the other, that really, and if you don't have as many rabbit holes,
right,
that really kind of takes down your information.
I'm just really excited, you know, because I just remember sitting at lunch with you maybe 10 weeks ago and talking about doing Unsolved, right?
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. I mean, we just said, you know, we really were happy with the main podcast, Solved. And then we just knew that there was a desire to do some of this Unsolved. And I'm just glad we've done it and that we're seeing the good reaction from our listeners out there.
Well, that's what you and I love, right? And we say it all the time, but the interaction, we've just been blown away. I mean, I think you and I starting both of the podcasts, never in our wildest dreams did we think, number one, that they would take off as fast as they did.
Right.
But number two, you know, the influx of whether it's Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, you know, or emails, right? When we started getting emails from all these different countries and you're thinking, man, there's a guy in Scotland that is listening to us right now.
Oh,
And he just sent an email.
it's crazy.
And now I have to read the email in a Scottish brogue.
I mean,
That was a horrible Scottish accent.
Yeah,
by
that
the way.
was terrible. I don't know what that really was, but yeah, I mean, the emails and text messages and things we get from people in Sweden, Australia. I mean, my gosh,
it blows me away.
Yeah,
It really
yeah,
does.
but I love it.
Yeah.
Keep them coming.
And the support, right? So getting ready to give a bunch of shout outs to our new Patreon supporters, that's blown us away too, because, it's somebody, taking the time, putting resources towards basically saying, hey, we appreciate what you do. It really means a lot. It helps us keep going. It helps us pay for the costs of doing the podcast.
We work hard and we appreciate it. And we I mean, they're donating their hard-earned money.
Yeah. And that blows me away as well. And we say it all the time, but I don't think that we can even express the appreciation. And it's not just Patreon. It's word of mouth. Mm-hmm. It's people taking the time to rate us on iTunes, all that stuff. It just blows me away. But so Patreon specifically, got to give a shout outs to Laura, Juliet Howe, Renee Williams, Michelle Watson, Anita Mitchell, Leslie Kidd, Janice Leiberts, Rebecca Manners, and Jack Ardone. Jack, I've said it on this podcast. I said it on the other one. Buddy, if I messed it up, I apologize. I'm doing my best.
Just call him Big Jack.
Big Jack, we appreciate it. Thank you so much to all the new Patreon supporters and to all the people that have been with us from the beginning that continue to support us. It is amazing. With that said, make sure you check out our website. If you're not following us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, check that out. We had a listener that just started a brand new True Crime All the Time Facebook group, which is a closed group that, all you got to do is do a search for it and an admin will let you in. But it's a cool place where people can talk about the show and cases and theories and all of that stuff. Gibby and I jump on.
Oh, absolutely.
We'll get right in the middle of it as well. So, if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, check that out. Check out our merchandise. Right now we're offering a 10% discount on everything at the merchandise store, and you can get that discount code either on our Facebook page or on Twitter. Speaking of Twitter, Gibby and I shared some high school pictures of ourselves that we were having this fun kind of banner with some of our other favorite true crime podcasts, Insight, Twisted Philly, Already Gone, True Crime Island, just, some really cool people also putting out some really good content. And I don't know how it got started, but people started putting out pictures of themselves back in the day, and it was kind of fun. And everybody was commenting on that. So you can go back in the feed and find it pretty easily. So all of that out of the way, right, Gibbs? We are talking about the Honolulu Strangler and really what amounts to Hawaii's first notable serial killer.
Yeah, it really is.
Sometimes you'll see it called the Honolulu Rapist.
Yeah, sometimes called the Wahoo Five.
For the 5 victims.
The 5 victims, yeah.
So, again, we talk about it all the time, right? All these cases, all these serial killers have to have not just one nickname, but usually 2 or 3.
Yeah.
You see that a lot. But we're really talking about 5 women that were killed in a relatively short period of time. We're talking 1985, 1986 time period. But you know what gets me? So you think about Hawaii, right, as a destination place. You think about the beaches. You think about the water. People sipping Mai Tais,
right.
Relaxing.
Don Ho.
Get you a little pig roast going.
Yeah.
With a luau. You don't think serial killers.
No.
And I don't think there's a lot of serial killers from Hawaii. I'm sure there's a number because there's serial killers everywhere you go.
Right.
But this is definitely one of the first, if not the, I think it is the first.
And you just touching on the tourism there, right? I mean, this did hamper the tourism just slightly during that time.
I can imagine.
So,
if you got a guy going around killing women, and my wife and I are thinking about where we're going to go, on vacation.
Yeah.
We're not going we're not going to Honolulu.
Might turn that plane around. Yeah. Turn that plane around.
We'll go to Florida.
Go to Florida.
Where there's like 30 times more serial killers.
Exactly. As well.
So, but, in all seriousness, I mean, we joke around some, but this is a serious case.
Yeah, it really is.
All of these victims were found, bound, hands behind their backs. They were all raped, sexually assaulted, and ultimately they were all strangled, and their bodies were dumped near some type of water. But obviously, because we're talking unsolved, the killer's never been caught.
That's right.
So I think we jump right into the victims, Gibbs, which is usually where we have to start on unsolved, as opposed to TCAT, where we're starting with the known killer and then working
our way through it.
Yeah, working through the victims. Now, the first victim found was Vicky Purdy. And Vicky was 25 years old, and she worked at a video rental store. Hopefully people listening remember what video rental stores were back then.
Yeah. Big Blockbuster days.
But now this was not a Blockbuster type store, Gibbs. And the reason is because this was one of those, and there were a lot of them back in the day, I guess. I just Blockbuster, I don't think did, but this video store actually rented, pornographic videos as well.
Huh.
And that plays in. What do you say? Huh.
What?
I wonder what those are.
Yeah.
But that kind of plays in a little bit later on, right? Because people are going to wonder, well, why do I care?
Yeah.
Why are you mentioning that?
Why is that?
Yeah. It's called the setup.
And you're good
Small
at the
setup.
And you're good at the setup.
The setup. Now, Vicky was married, and she was actually married to an Army helicopter pilot.
Which is cool.
Yeah. So let's get into the details of Vicky's last known whereabouts. Right? So we're talking May 29th, 1985. Now, Vicky had gone to a club in Waikiki, but she never made it to meet up with her friends. Her last known location that night was at the Shorebird Hotel, and it was sometime around midnight. And we know this because a taxi driver had dropped her off because she apparently needed to pick up her car. She must have left her car in the parking garage at the hotel. She took a taxi cab, so he was able to say, hey, I dropped her off at midnight. That was the last time she was seen. So obviously, Gibbs, she never returned home.
Yeah, she didn't make it.
And, one of the facts is that after she was reported missing, they found her car still parked in that lot there at the hotel. Now, she wasn't missing for very long because, unfortunately, they found her body the very next day, and they found it on an embankment at the Kihi Lagoon. And she was still dressed in the same outfit, which was a yellow jumpsuit that she'd had on the previous night. Like we said, and this is going to be a theme, right, as we go through the victims. Vicky's hands had been bound behind her back. She had been raped and strangled. Now, the police would go interview her husband, which obviously that's where they start, right? You always start with the spouse.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And he said something that kind of piqued their interest. And it was that he thought that her death was somehow connected to her job. Now, that seems strange because she works at a video rental store, but it's kind of the reason why we said that the store rented pornographic movies, because it plays into his theory, I think, because there had been a couple of women that had been stabbed and killed a year earlier, either connected with the store or outside the store.
Yeah, near the location for sure.
Right. So I don't know how pornographic movies fits into that, but if you maybe it's not so much of a leap, but if you can make the connection of somebody that's addicted to a certain type of pornographic movie, and they've got a penchant for something, I guess you could make that leap that maybe that would drive them to.
Well, I think you could. I mean, I think easily.
Yeah,
You're
right.
Attractive woman working at a woman working at a video store that rents out porn. You have this, desire for certain type of porn. You've seen her all the time when you rent. You think you can take it to another level,
I think you're right.
So they start stalking her. Next thing you know, she's on an embankment.
All right. You've changed me. You changed my mind.
That's just me thinking, which is scary.
I was thinking in the beginning that was a leap, and maybe it still is, but I think it's a much smaller leap.
Yeah.
Now that, you've kind of explained it that way, because pornography, if you believe Ted Bundy, which I don't, but he blamed everything. He blamed all of his crimes on pornography. In certain people's minds, or how they're wired,
Sure.
if you get too far into some of that,
Which can happen.
I can see where that could spill over into somebody that you see all the time, that you find attractive, and you think,
Well, you lose sense of reality.
yes,
And then you have this other obsession
right.
of what you think is reality, which truly is not.
And again, it depends on what type of pornography, because there's a lot of crazy types of pornography.
Yeah, I mean, this is 1980. I don't know what it was like then to compare to today, but I wouldn't know either way. But I'm just saying, I'm sure the categories.
You're out in yourself, and you don't even know it.
I'm not. I'm just saying the category is much, much broader today, I would think.
I don't think there's any doubt about that, but there is some pornography, I'm assuming, that deals with bondage, that deals with some of the darker,
Strangulation, maybe.
Yeah,
Choking.
simulated.
Yeah,
that deals with some of the darker stuff. So if we get into that, I think that makes that argument even a little bit stronger.
Yeah, good point.
Thank you. Now, the second victim was Regina Sakamoto. Now, Regina was only 17 years old. So again, Vicky was 25. Regina's only 17. I mean, she's still a student at the high school.
Yeah, what school was that?
Leilahua. You just wanted me to.
I did.
You wanted to make me say it. Now, on January 14th, 1986, Regina called her boyfriend to let him know that she was going to be late to school. She missed her bus. Last time anybody ever heard from her was that call to her boyfriend saying, "Hey, I'm going to be late. I've missed my bus." So how was she going to get to school if she missed her bus? Right? That's got to play into this.
You would think that would be one of the, follow-ups.
Right. That's got to be big in the investigation.
Right.
So again, this is very similar to Vicky, because the very next day, January 15th, Regina's body is found at the very same Kihi Lagoon. Now, like Vicky, Regina was still wearing her blue tank top and white shirt that she'd had on the day before. But unlike Vicky, Regina was naked or nude, whichever one you prefer, from the waist down. But exactly like Vicky, Regina had her hands bound behind her back, and she had also been, raped, sexually assaulted, strangled. So again, I mean, you can't get much more of a connection here, I don't think, Gibbs, with the MO, the location that the bodies were found.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of gelling together. I mean, the similarities, and there's no pattern of time, right? I mean, because you're looking at what the Vicky was in May of '85, and now we're into January of '86. So, nothing like it's not a pattern like every 30 days or every 2 weeks or something like that. It's just sporadic at this point.
Well, and the other thing is, I think that connects them is last seen one day, bodies found the very next day. I mean, almost identical, right? The only difference I think that I can see in these first two victims are, number one, their ages. Regina's younger, still in high school.
Right.
And Vicky was found completely clothed.
But yet raped.
Right. So now she's wearing a jumpsuit. It was described as a jumpsuit.
Right.
So I think I see where you're getting at, because that jumpsuit had to have been removed at some point and then probably just put back on.
Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking?
Or opened up somehow.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And with Regina, maybe he just didn't bother, putting back on her bottoms or the bottom part of her clothing.
So in 85, 86, where did we stand with DNA testing?
I don't know exactly, but I would say it was I would say if it was there at all, it was in its infancy.
Okay.
Because OJ was what, 93?
I think so.
I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't have it in front of me. So we're talking about 7-8 years before OJ. I'm thinking it was, if it was around, it was in its infancy.
So nothing that could be trustworthy or even, most likely, not even used.
Yeah, either not used or it was so new that...
Use it for a conviction. Not enough science behind it, maybe? Not enough...
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking the science was probably not evolved enough at that point. Yeah, I'm sure some of our scientific listeners, and we have some that have pretty high degrees, actually.
We actually do, yeah.
They're going to let us know. But I see where you're getting at, right? Gosh, I just have to think 85, 86. That seems early.
It really does.
Man, if we had something called Google.
Yeah.
And we could look that up. So we talked about the connections, Gib. And the police are making the connection. The connection is strong between these two incidents. Even though they're, 7-8 months apart.
Right.
They know pretty quickly that, hey, we've got, most likely this is the same killer.
But I don't think they want that out in the public yet, right? Because this is a big tourism area, and I think they're trying to protect that from getting out in the open. And it would make sense. I mean, you're talking big money. I mean, that whole island is based off of tourism.
Oh, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not they're not going to be publicizing that
No.
at this point in time.
They don't want to scare anybody off that island.
Now, one fact about Regina is, she was just getting ready to attend Hawaii Pacific University in the fall. I mean, again, 17 years old, Gibbs.
Yeah.
She had her whole life ahead of her. All of these are rough. But, and I say it all the time, and for me, the younger somebody is, the more tragic. And maybe I shouldn't say it. It's all tragic.
It's all tragic. I think it's because we can relate to the younger ones.
Right, because I have a daughter that
yes.
is her age. Yeah.
Yes.
I think you're right.
And that's why.
So we next have to talk about Denise Hughes. Again, she's only 21 years old. So, these are all people 17, 21, 25. Mm-hmm. At our age, these are kids.
Absolutely.
These are kids getting ready to start their life. And Denise was a secretary for a telephone company, and she was a very active member of her church. And here's the other thing I want to say. You and I do a lot of unsolved cases where we're talking about what I would term high-risk victims, right? People that are into either prostitution, drugs, something where they're putting themselves at risk. We're not talking about these type of people, right? We're talking about
just
a high school student,
girl next door.
We're talking about a secretary at a telephone company,
right?
That is very active in her church. I just want to point that out.
Yeah.
Because you and I do so many cases where, you feel sorry for any victim.
Absolutely.
But there are some people that put themselves in a position
of risk.
Yeah. It doesn't make it right.
No.
They're still victims. But I have to point that out because you and I don't get to talk about a lot of times people like this.
Yeah, and I just think, again, it's just like you said, it's like the girl next door, just a good person getting up in the morning and doing their day.
Now, so with Denise, we're talking January 30th of 1986. This is only a couple of weeks after Regina was found.
Clearly, the appetite is increasing.
Much quicker. So obviously the time between attacks has shortened dramatically. And what does that say? Is that somebody that did, committed the first murder, committed the second murder, the appetite is increasing? I think, like you said, they can't control the urges. I'm just trying to piece this together, or both, all of the above.
Yeah, it could be too.
Now, the one thing about Denise is, she always took the bus to work, and that day on the 30th of January, she didn't show up to work. Obviously, people were worried. My take is somebody like this is probably punctual. They always show up for work. The minute that they don't, and the fact that they don't call, raises the alarm bells.
Yeah, it really does.
But again, her body is found very quickly. It's found February 1st in a stream by 3 fishermen. So again, just keeping everything together. Now, a different body of water, but bodies found pretty quickly.
Well, and I think that stream that she was found by leads into the lagoon.
Okay. Well, then that does make a lot of sense. Denise was dressed in a blue dress, but then she had been wrapped in this blue tarp. So again, a little bit of difference there. I'm not sure what significance the blue tarp played. because the other ones weren't wrapped in anything.
No, so maybe just wherever the location where she was actually killed versus where the body was dumped. Maybe that's how
Needed that for transport.
Somehow
that
for whatever
could be.
reason why.
But very similar, right? Just like the other victims, Denise had her hands bound behind her back. She'd been sexually assaulted and strangled. So all that's lining up with the other two. And that's too much to be ignored, especially the timing between the second and the third victim. They know at this point that they have a serial killer on their hands. And because of that, this prompts them to start up a task force. And that was done on February 5th. So that was just like 4 days after they found Denise's body. So they're moving fairly quickly.
Now this task force, it was generated and funded by the Travel Bureau.
Which makes a lot of sense, right? You mentioned it. Tourism is everything in Hawaii. I mean, they produce some things, but tourism is huge.
Oh, yeah. It's the big dollar.
So it doesn't surprise me at all that they would initiate and even fund this task force. They want this thing solved as much as anyone outside of the victims' families. Let's say that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, bottom line is they can't have a serial killer running around affecting the dollars.
No.
That's it. Bottom line.
Yeah. Otherwise, you would never have the Brady Bunch showing up there.
Right. How are they going to get to Hawaii and do their stuff?
Famous thing. So that brings us up to the fourth victim, which was Louise Medeiros. She was 25, and she lived in Waipahu, but she was in Kahua visiting her family because her mom just passed away. Louise took a red-eye flight back to Oahu, and she told her family that day that she would just go ahead and take a bus from the airport. So when she landed in Oahu, she got off the plane, and she was never seen again after that until her body was found near a stream by some road workers on April 2nd. So from March 26th to April 2nd, we've got like 6 days that have passed.
Yeah, so what are we talking about from Denise to Louise? Just a couple of months.
Couple months there.
And then a little bit longer to find the body, but we really don't know why that is. Is the stream a little more secluded than some of the other places? Just, trying to think of why it would take longer to find.
Right. And of course her body was decomposing because, this is Hawaii and it's been 6 days.
So I would imagine that her body was in a state of decomposition much more advanced than the first three victims, right? The heat and that amount of time.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm glad you agree.
Now, just like the other victims, she did have her T-shirt on. However, her lower body was naked and her hands were bound behind her back.
So again, the similarities are striking. Hands bound behind the back, naked from the waist down, sexually assaulted, killed by strangulation. It's just too much to overlook.
And dumped by a body of water.
Right, in a stream. I don't know, Gibbs, that we've ever done an episode where the victims have been so similar in the way that they were found.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think.
And
I think you're right.
These are almost exact.
I think as a law enforcement officer, if they were, looking at this, they would have to say this is this is the same guy.
Oh, there's no doubt.
There is no, you know,
There's no doubt. And I think that's why after the third, they set up the task force. And after Louise is found, now they've got the task force, but they're going to take it a step further and they're going to start setting up sting operations. And they're going to do this by using women police officers and, putting them in around the Keehee Lagoon and the airport. I guess just trying to
see if they can get any type of lead.
Right. But they don't have any success with that. I mean, you and I, we don't know how the victims are being chosen. The police don't know how the victims are being chosen. And from my point of view, right now with what we know, this would be a really hard case.
Yeah. I mean, besides taking out the Keehee Lagoon all the time, which is a huge lagoon, so it'd be impossible without a lot of manpower. So what else are they going to do?
But even then, what are they waiting for? For somebody to come along to try to dump a body?
Yeah, exactly. What could they?
Because it's not like he's picking up these women at the lagoon.
No.
This is where they're ultimately ending up. So
right.
I don't know what they're doing at the airport. If they had a thought that
it was just only one passenger, right? The one victim that came off of the air
that was never seen.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course, that was the last one we just talked about. So that maybe that's just, they figured maybe he's camped around the airport.
Okay. So I get you. That does make some sense. The first three, it doesn't, because they had nothing to do with the airport. But maybe they thought, okay, he's changed up. He's picking people off plane. I don't know. But again, they're probably trying everything or trying to think of every possible thing that they can try, because this is tough.
Absolutely. I mean, again, they're worried about terrorism, right? And of course, they're concerned about their community.
Both, yeah.
Yeah.
So that takes us to the last known victim, and her name was Linda Pesky. Now, Linda was 36, so a little bit older than the other four. Not a lot, but a little bit older. That's something I always look at when we look at serial killers and victims and things like that. I look at ages, and I look at age ranges. And we've seen it all over the map, right? I don't know that we've ever seen a serial killer who only preyed on 20-year-olds. Exactly, right? There's always been some age range, and some of them have been pretty wide, from, in this case, 17 to 36. That's not that wide, but we've seen it from teens all the way up to 60, 70 years old. And I just go back to, normally I think serial killers have a type. And so this age range doesn't seem out of the ordinary to me.
Well, your 36-year-old could look like a 25-year-old, right?
Yeah,
she could.
Right.
And a 17-year-old high school student can easily look like she's
20-something.
20-something. So
yeah, I think it's important. I think the typing to me is always something that I look at, because I do think it's very important, because you go to somebody like Bundy, right? Ted Bundy had a type, a very specific type, and it was dark hair, it was parted in the middle. I mean, it was very, to the point where women were changing their hairstyle
just to avoid being on the radar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for me, and people listening or other people out there may have a different opinion, but to me, the typing, or, the serial killer type, is very important when you're analyzing it. So like we said, Linda is the fifth and the last known victim of the Honolulu Strangler. Doesn't mean there couldn't have been more, but I think they, given the fact that all of these were so similar, Gibbs, I think they would have picked it up pretty quickly.
I do too.
The only thing I would say is he, and we're assuming it's a him, but he would have had to have changed his MO completely to not be linked. And
Right.
that's possible,
Oh, sure.
but not likely. Not likely to kill 5 people in a very, very similar way. And I guess I'm getting ahead of myself because we need to talk about Linda, but I'll come back to that. So Linda had a roommate, and her roommate would be the one that would tell the story of her last known whereabouts. And, you know, it was her roommate that said that Linda left home on the morning of April 29th. Again, she was heading to work. Now, her roommate was expecting her home that night, but later on in the evening, because I guess Linda had some kind of work meeting that was going to go later than normal. So it wasn't until the next morning that her roommate found out that Linda, number one, Linda had not come home. Number two, she had not shown up for work. And number three, she was notified that Linda's car was found parked on the side of the Nimitz Viaduct. So you put all that together and her roommate's freaking out, right? Has to be.
Absolutely.
And she reports Linda missing to the police. Now, this is where it starts to go a little sideways for me, because there's a man that comes forward, Caucasian male, he's 43 years old, goes to the police claiming that a psychic told him that there was a body on Sand Island. So on May 3rd, the police go out to Sand Island, and they go to this exact location that this man has come and said that the psychic told him that the body would be found. They don't find a body. But what they do is search Sand Island and ultimately discover Linda Pesky's body. Now, like the other victims, Linda was found with her hands bound behind her back. She'd been sexually assaulted, strangled. So again, all this is matching up. Now, the one notable difference, Gibbs, with Linda is that she was found completely nude. And she was the only one of the 5 that was found completely nude. Most of the other ones were found partially nude. And, you know, like we said, Vicky Purdy had been found with her jumpsuit still on, but I think we can make the conclusion or draw the conclusion that, you know, to be sexually assaulted at some point, that jumpsuit had to have been removed and then put back on.
Put back on. Yeah.
I think that's pretty safe to say. So we got to get into the investigation. And we talked earlier about the formation of the task force. And, you know, they have 27 people working on this serial killer task force. And they're also getting help from the FBI as well as the Green River Task Force. So, you know, that's Gary Ridgway. He's definitely going to be a big timer on True Crime All the Time at some point.
Right.
But they're getting a lot of help. You know, if the FBI is involved, and you have to assume that this Green River Task Force is very knowledgeable. So the one thing that the FBI assisted the Honolulu Police Department with was coming up with a profile, right? FBI is famous for their profilers. And what they came up with was, number one, this was a serial killer. I don't think that was too hard to put together.
Right.
But they saw this serial killer as an opportunist, right? Somebody that when they saw the opportunity, they struck. They saw the person as somebody who attacked women that were in vulnerable situations and places. And this goes back to, we talked about a couple of the victims took the bus. They viewed those as, vulnerable places, a bus stop. What they did not think that this serial killer was a stalker. Didn't think that it was a BTK type, right? Finding a victim, stalking them
for days and days,
and analyzing their every movement just to figure out when the perfect opportunity to strike, right? This is the total opposite. This is when I see somebody that is in a situation where I can grab them easily, I do it. That's what the profiler came up with. They thought it would be Caucasian male, 30s to 40s. Now, almost every FBI profile I see
comes across
says
that way.
Caucasian male, 30s to 40s, or some, almost every one of them is very similar to that. But specifically, they thought that this person would not have a criminal record. I wonder what they were basing that off of.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, how could you analyze that to come out with, based off what you've seen at the murder scenes, that they couldn't have a criminal record? I don't know.
I don't either. The only thing that I can think of is, again, does it go back to the type of victim, right? These were not drug addicts. These were not people that were involved in prostitution or criminal activities themselves. Were they basing it on that?
And would you say strangulation was more of a sexual arousal type of kill versus, not getting a knife out and plunging?
They both can be, but strangulation is always viewed as a power thing,
mm-hmm.
but it is often linked to a sexual arousal. Now, there have been plenty of serial killers that have derived sexual arousal from knife work too.
Okay.
I've heard it said that, plunging a knife is almost like sex.
Orgasmic form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too gory, but I've heard that before from serial killers that were more of, that used more knife type work.
K-bars.
I don't understand it, but
yeah,
again, you and I don't understand. We can't understand any of this.
No, we could never.
We can talk about it. We can debate it. We can do all of that stuff, but we'll never understand it. Now, the other thing that the profiler thought was that this serial killer most likely either worked or lived or some combination of both in the area where the attacks had occurred. It was also suggested that this person that had been committing the crimes may have recently experienced some kind of trauma in their personal life, either with a girlfriend or a spouse, some type of marital or relationship problem that had sparked this or had exacerbated the situation. Some of that does make sense to me. So while the police were trying to find Linda, right? So they knew she was missing. They had not yet found her body. During that period of time, one of the things that they did is they set up roadblocks. And they did that in order to question people that had been, that drove certain routes just to see if they had seen anything. And they actually did have some people that came forward. There were witnesses that claimed that they had seen a light-colored van and a Caucasian male with Linda's car. Now that's very specific.
Yeah, and it kind of matches that profile, FBI.
Well, it matches the profile, you're right, but it also matches pretty closely, maybe, the description of this guy that comes forward who claims that a psychic told him. Because, we didn't talk about it that much, but that is weird.
That is weird.
Right? It's one thing to say, you're a psychic, I'm coming forward to help with the investigation. But I go to the police and I say, I'm an average Joe, but I happen to talk to a psychic.
That told me
Right.
that this happened, so I wanted to tell you.
Right.
Yeah, that's
I'm just passing it along.
Yeah.
The psychic told me.
Right.
I'm just telling you.
That's a little weird.
That whole thing is weird. So, not only does it match the profile, but again, we said that this kind of strange guy was a 43-year-old Caucasian male. So it pretty much matches that. Now, it also matches like hundreds of thousands of other people. How many Caucasian males in their 30s to 40s were, prancing around Oahu at that time? I don't know.
But, it's interesting that you have this 43-year-old Caucasian male that tells them about the psychic, and there's a Caucasian male that's driving her car. It's the best lead they've got.
Oh, by far. Because to my knowledge, they've had jack squat.
Right.
Up to this point. So then, once Linda's body was discovered, police actually arrest this guy that we're talking about, right? The informant or the psychic guy that comes forward. They consider him their prime suspect. And this occurs on May 9th. So the one thing, Gibbs, is this was all very quick, right? This guy comes in, claims psychic told him Sand Island. They go out, the police do, May 3rd. They find Linda's body. They come back and arrest this guy 6 days later on May 9th.
Then it kind of gets kind of good.
Yeah, because after they arrest him, they start interviewing people in his life. They interview his ex-wife. They interview his current girlfriend. And both provide some damaging evidence against him. Now, the damaging evidence is, depending on what your term damaging is.
Right.
Because basically what they say is that this guy enjoyed sexual activities that included, tying their hands behind their backs while they had sex.
Well, and I think it's a good point, too, that they talk about how he was a smooth talker. Because that probably came into play to entice these 5 victims to either allow him to get in the vehicle with them or for him to get them in his vehicle. Somehow he had to, charm them enough to get that close to them in an isolated area.
Oh, I would agree. Being a smooth talker, like yourself, helps in a lot of situations.
Because I
No, it really does. Again, I've mentioned Bundy a couple times, but he was a smooth talker.
Absolutely.
And
could you say he was the king of smooth talking
he
serial
might have
killer?
been. To me, that's circumstantial at best. And that's kind of pushing it, right?
Right.
Now, you add that with the fact that it's super weird that this guy came forward at all. So they had to have thought, this guy's weird. Why would he come in here and say that he thinks he knows where the body is? That has to make him suspect number 1. So they arrest him. They start talking to people in his life. They find out that he enjoys tying women's hands behind their back. That makes them even more suspicious of him. And then his current girlfriend does say that on the nights of the murders, now this is pretty specific because we're talking about 5 murders. So what she is saying is that on each one of these nights, they had gotten into a big fight and he had left the house, right? So now you're getting into a little bit better evidence, I guess. I mean, it's still circumstantial, but the fact is that now he would have no alibi for specifically those 5 nights. So, Gibbs, we have to talk a little bit more about this suspect that was arrested. You know, the guy was a mechanic for an air freight company. And like we said, he was arrested on May 9th. He was interrogated for quite some time. He ended up taking a polygraph test that he failed. But ultimately, he had to be released. It just didn't have enough evidence. Right? Like we said, they've got some circumstantial, barely
Right.
enough to even, I mean, it's enough to make you think this guy could have had something to do with it.
But nothing physical to tie him to it.
No, but when you're talking, legally, it's not enough to do anything with, I don't think.
No. Maybe hold him long enough to try to investigate it, but eventually I'm sure that they've got to be able to let him go.
Yeah. Now, we can sit here and say the guy had no alibi. He had a penchant for wanting to tie women up. He did fail a polygraph test, which I don't know how much stock I put in
Especially
those.
back then in 1980. I mean, how good was the...
Yeah, I don't even know
the
today
mechanics
how
behind
good
it.
they are. I mean, they're not admissible, I don't believe, in most places. I don't even know if there are states that, where they are admissible anymore. But the one thing the police do is they issue a $25,000 reward. And again, this was put up by private businesses. I have to assume that it was related to the tourism industry, right? Because they want this guy caught. But the $25,000 reward is for, any information related to the case. And the other thing that they did is they started following the suspect, right? Because even though they had to release him,
So they got surveillance on him.
yeah, I have to think that they still think he's their prime suspect.
If they could catch him in the act, slam dunk, right?
Yeah, that's what they're hoping. So things are quiet for a little while, but a couple of months after all this goes down, there is a woman that comes forward and she claims to be an eyewitness, and she says that she had seen a man with Linda that night that she was murdered. And ultimately, she's able to pick this guy that we've been talking about as the suspect out of a lineup, and she says, yes, that's the guy I saw. The problem is, and you and I have seen this in a couple of cases.
Yeah, we have.
She was so scared for her own safety that she was not willing to stand up in a court of law and say that. So I don't know. There's a lot of smoke here, right, against this guy.
There is.
But there's no murders committed after this point that match up, that you would say match the other 5. The rewards never claimed. And this guy that is the prime suspect, he ends up moving, to the mainland, and he dies in 2005. So even if he was the guy, he's dead now.
He's
so,
gone. Yep.
The case is cold, has been cold, I would assume, for, quite a long time. Now, I did find some interesting stuff that I want to talk about. And this comes from like deep, deep research. I didn't even, I was digging deep for some of this. And I think I found it on a message board. So again, I don't know the veracity of all this, but I thought it was very interesting because, there was a woman that was responding to something, and she says that she thought she may have been a survivor of the Honolulu Strangler. She goes on to say it was like 81, 82. Now, this would have been a little early. The first murder didn't occur till 85.
Doesn't mean this guy wasn't active then, though.
No, no doubt about it. Doesn't mean he wasn't trying or starting or, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, because, this is 1981?
She thought it was 81 or 82. She couldn't remember for sure.
Yeah.
She was a tourist, and she was bound in the same manner as these women. And she says that she survived because he thought he had bound both of her hands, but he'd really only got one. So she was able to get the other one free. And when she got the opportunity, she took off running, screaming. And the guy got in his car real quick and drove away. Now, she reported this all to the police and even talked to, a detective. But again, nothing came out of it. I just thought it was an interesting story that you have somebody that was attacked in Hawaii in the same area in the same manner years earlier.
Right.
Who's thinking, man, I may have dodged a bullet.
And it's interesting that you say that because, another victim that's kind of thrown into this, but it was 1982, so a little bit earlier than the known five, is that Lisa Au, right? And I don't know if I'm saying her last name right, but again, she was a victim in 1982 of some of the stuff was similar. It was interesting, some interesting details and stuff like that. But again, we're going to the same area, right? We're in the same island, same area, and around this victim that says she was attacked but survived. This is just a few months after what she says happened to her.
But now, Lisa was killed, though.
Yes.
So her body was found in like you said, 82?
82. It's an unsolved case as well.
But with very similar circumstances.
Enough to make people wonder if this was the early works of what was known later as the Honolulu Strangler. If this was his, like the one you talked about, she got away.
Right.
She survived. Not got away, but survived. And then Lisa was not lucky enough to survive, and that he just built from that.
Well, similar enough that there were eyewitness reports that somebody saw Lisa with a Caucasian man,
right?
Maybe around the same, age range.
Well, and she was also found she wasn't found, I don't think, by a body of water, but she was found on the side of the road, kind of dumped, kind of similar to how the other ones were dumped.
Just not in a body of water.
Right.
So, yeah, again, could be completely separate, could be the early works, or, the Honolulu Strangler starting or trying to figure out how he wants to do things.
Right.
You just never know.
No, at least out of Lisa's case, because it was a lot of speculation that this white, this Caucasian man used fake police lights back in the day, right? You had the people that could just throw a blue light on top of their car,
Right.
and pull you over. Well, after this, they put a code out that, at least on that island, that people could no longer use those type of lights. So
Because they thought that that's how
that he would be imitating a police officer to get women to pull over, and use that to his advantage. But then in the same realm of what we've been talking about tonight is then you have the big case of Diane Suzuki, which again, now most of the law enforcement folks, they do feel this was probably somebody else, but it was around that same time, right? This is 1985, and it goes into some similarities, but I think eventually they push back to the fact that there was a photographer she worked with at her dance studio, and it does dive deep enough in that I believe that they're correct, that this had nothing to do with the Honolulu Strangler. But again, here we are in the same time frame, the same island, and just another bizarre, unsolved murder.
So Gibbs, I do want to talk about, before we close this episode, and again, this is talked about as possibly being related, but doesn't mean it is, because it happens, about 15 years on. So we're talking 2000 now.
Sure.
Now we're talking a different island. We're talking, the area of I guess you'd pronounce it Kauai, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Kauai.
Because
Yeah. But you talk about 15 years later, but really that's not that bizarre. Just all you have to do is think about BTK.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he
went on a long period of time there before he jumped back in the game.
Yeah, so what happened in Kauai in 2000 is there were 3 women that turned up murdered. In April of 2000, Lisa Bissell, she was 38. She was found on an old sugarcane road near a state park. And then on May 22nd, so these all kind of happened, fairly close together. A 52-year-old woman was beaten, stabbed, sexually assaulted at her home. So, again, are there similarities here? Not really, other than the fact that there was 3 women murdered. They thought it was a serial killer, and she actually survived. This 52-year-old lady, she survived the attack. Then on August 30th, the body of Darren Singer, 43, was found at a beach near Waimea, and then all of a sudden the killing stopped. So it was interesting. All 3 victims were middle-aged women. They all had the kind of a slight to medium build, very similar. They all had light hair. So again, is this another serial killer?
Well, so you were saying, so is this the same guy, 15 years later on another island that, is this another serial killer?
Well, if it was the same guy, it would mean that he completely changed up his MO. Completely. Well, I shouldn't say completely, but this involves stabbing. These women weren't bound.
Yeah.
They were sexually assaulted, but that happens in a lot of cases.
So this could be a whole another serial killer. Could be.
It could be. Or could it be that, our guy took a break?
Yeah.
And island hopped, and then...
And if he's older, because he would be older, Maybe he doesn't have the strength that he had to strangle, and it was easier to stab.
You could be right.
You know,
We don't know.
We don't know. That's why it's rabbit hole.
It's unsolved.
Unsolved.
We
And
just throw it out there.
just tells me that even in paradise, it's dangerous.
Dude, it's dangerous everywhere.
Yeah, well,
I mean, we could pick a state and just talk about a serial killer.
I just think I'll just stay in my man cave and
No, I agree with you. That's the case of the Honolulu Strangler. Again, we talk about this at the end of some, could it ever be solved? Well, if it's that one guy, he died in 2005.
right.
So could it be solved? Yeah. He could never be convicted. But again, with advances in DNA, all that stuff, I just don't know. I think my likelihood for this one's not high.
Yeah, man. So I think you're right, because here we are 30 some years later. What's the chances? Well, 30 some years later, anybody that had any knowledge or involved in that case at that time has most likely passed away, right? Or they're at an age that they're just not going to be able to recall the events that occurred back then.
Yeah, I think at any age, right?
I mean, you're not going to have a strong witness at that point.
Yeah, 30 some years at any age, it's just your recollection is not going to be the same. But my thing is, so the police think their prime suspect is dead. How much effort are they really putting into the case? If they really thought, and I believe they did, I really think they thought this guy was the guy. They just could not put the evidence together to make a case. They know he died in 2005.
And I think he was the guy. I think he was, but again, that's why it's unsolved. We don't know that. They didn't have enough evidence to do anything to prosecute him. But why would they spend so much time trying to, put a tail on him, right? Surveil him.
Because they thought he was the guy.
They thought he was a guy. To the point at one point, one of the side articles talked about how they actually even had him surveilled when he went to the mainland.
Oh, even after.
After. So that because they were still, concerned.
All right, so that's it for the Honolulu Strangler and another episode of T-Cat Unsolved. For Mike
and Gibby, aloha.
Stay safe and keep your own time ticking.